Hello, Marc Palker, your not-so-normal CFO. What I decided to do for this episode is to make it kind of a story hour. We've all been working a long time. I've been working a very long time. And through those years, we accumulate stories, some of which are very, very interesting. Also understand that as I talk about each situation individually, I will not be mentioning the name of the company for obvious reasons. CFO is a very, very confidential position. Before we even talk about the first company, I want to talk about how this all got started. The way it got started is I was the CFO of a publicly traded small company, and I was pretty bored. The company really wasn't growing. They were making some money, same amount every year. Stock wasn't moving. And then my world got a little exciting. I received one day a phone call at 4 p.m. from CBS Market Watch. I didn't even know who they were. But once I got on the phone with them, they made it very clear who they were. Our stock that day had gone from $1.25 to $2.75, and it's their responsibility to call the CFO and find out why. Well, I didn't know, because I don't get involved in the trading of the stock. I just help operate the business and run the finances. Long story short, the seventh grader who was manipulating our stock was on 60 Minutes. He had to return all his profits. He was doing what they call at the beginning of the internet craze, a pump and dump. He was putting out false stories about the company that people would think would increase value, and when the stock went up, he sold it, and then when it came back down, he bought it again, put out another story, and he made quite a bit of money as a seventh grader. Pretty ingenious, but very illegal. So that got me thinking there was a lot more exciting things out in this world than this little tiny company. So I went to the major shareholder, who was in Canada, and said, I have an idea. How about if you fire me, pay me a nice severance package, and then I'll work for you during my severance period, helping you with all your Canadian companies, bringing them to the stock exchange in the United States. Because he didn't have anybody that worked for him who knew United States securities law as it related to accounting and financial reporting. So I was going to fill that void. We were going to move a lot of companies from Canada onto the NASDAQ, and we were going to have a lot of fun and things were going to be great. Except 4 or 5 months later, the NASDAQ crashed, and that was the end of that plan. But part of my deal was that I could get my own clients and my own following and go out and be a fractional CFO. Fractional CFO is somebody who's usually not an employee, only works 2-3 days a week in the company, and helps the company whether they're on the way up or on the way down. Either way, they need somebody with the expertise of a CFO and do not have one. So I have 4 stories today about situations I was involved in as a fractional CFO. The first one was a company in the technology industry. High-flying company in its heyday, very successful, made a lot of money. The employees also accumulated a lot of money through stock options. And then eventually what happened is the board of directors made a very bad decision to buy a company overseas to expand their operations, and it was a huge flop. And the flop almost bankrupt the company. In addition to that, the industry for their product had reduced selling prices over 50%. When your gross margins are set at 25% and your revenue goes down 50%, well, guess what? The money you have available to operate your company has been halved. And that's how the company really ran into trouble and was very close to filing bankruptcy. So the CFO had a stroke, and he attributed the stroke to the condition of the business, and he wasn't coming back. So the company, it's very hard to find a CFO when the company is headed south, headed towards bankruptcy, and really doesn't have a lot of insight to how they're going to continue to operate into the future. So there comes the fractional CFO who tries to stabilize the ship, keep it sailing until something positive can be done. I knew I was in trouble when the last question on the interview from the president of the company was, do you have bankruptcy experience? Once I heard that, I knew where the company was headed, but I really took it as a challenge. And here's the funny part. 2 weeks into the assignment, the old CFO who had come back to help transition items to me said in my office, I'm very nervous. And he started shaking. And this is a guy who just had a stroke. So I got very nervous. And I said, what's bothering you? He says, we only have 2 weeks worth of payroll in the bank. And I started to laugh. I started to laugh so hard I almost fell off my chair. He got very upset. And he says, what's wrong with you? I said, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not used to people coming in and telling me we only have 2 weeks worth of payroll in the bank. I'm used to people coming into my office and telling me we have 2 days worth of payroll in the bank. And within 30 days, we raised $1 million from our inventory by really searching the shelves and selling what we could sell. But the plan was to either turn the company around or position it for sale so that all the employees could keep their jobs. Of course, other than management. Once the new owners come in, management is gone. So what we did is we did 3 private placement raises for money. We sold patents that the company owned as long as we retained the right to use them. And then we did 2 final transactions for 2 different parts of the businesses so that the company could transfer ownership of its divisions, all the employees keep their jobs, and of course, management goes on its merry way. But I consider that, even though I was out of a job or an assignment, I consider that a success because of all the happy people in the building who didn't have to get termination notices or go on unemployment. The second interesting story that happened is there was a construction company and the owner was being indicted and going to jail for misappropriating $15 million in payroll tax. The U.S. government doesn't think lightly of that, and they wanted somebody to be in the company to monitor the owner to make sure no more payroll taxes left the company, that all payroll taxes were paid timely and to the U.S. government. So I got the assignment. My first part of the assignment, put payroll on ADP. I don't think ADP is the best company, but they are a good company. But the reason why ADP was chosen, every single judge knows ADP. So when you walk in the court and say we put payroll on ADP to guarantee the payroll taxes, they know who ADP is. So it was really a buzzword, but we did it. We not only got the company converted to ADP on time, the deadline I was given, but we were also able at the same time to install job costing to keep better records as far as tracking whether jobs made money, lost money, and where they were along the way. The other interesting part of the project was the IRS could not determine when the last time the owner or any of the companies filed a tax return. So that was negotiated that they were going to go back to 2012 for the owner and for the company. And we had to recreate the records within the companies so that eventually tax returns could be prepared and presented to the Department of Justice. And that was done as a success. How did it all end? Well, it ended in, I figured out after 9 months how the owner, even though it was his company 100%, was stealing money from the company, but he wasn't stealing it from payroll tax. And the minute I figured that out and presented it to the attorney, I was gone, not because the attorney wanted me gone, but the owner said, I can't work with this guy anymore. Of course not. I found out how he was lining his pockets, but as far as the government is concerned, although he wasn't taking payroll money, what he was taking is money that would have been available to pay back part of his $15 million debt. So it was a little contentious. It was fun. It was a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle, trying to put the pieces all together so that you can make your reports, give your opinions, and hopefully, once again, save jobs for people who are working there, because if the owner was put in jail, the company would go out of business and 200 employees would be out of jobs. So it's pretty important, even though it sounds more like investigations, but it's really keeping the company going on a daily basis because I had to monitor every dollar in and every dollar out. The third one that I'm going to tell you about today was a company located on Long Island that had a very, very nice business, about 180 million. And the owner's thought process was, I want to build this to a $250 million company and I want to sell it. When I was brought in the summer, I was brought in to help finish the certified audit by the accounting firm. And what was strange is the audit was due at the bank April 30th. I was brought in July. So they were already 3 months late. To cut to the chase, the audit finished in December and it ended in very contentious circumstances because the owner with control over the employees, as the de facto CFO in the company, when I went and interviewed employees to get the proper information to prepare the statements in a proper fashion according to generally accepted accounting principles for the auditors, I wasn't told the truth. And it took a long time for us to uncover that I wasn't told the truth. That did not make me feel well, because I felt like I was part of the fraud that was trying to be perpetuated on the auditors. But the audit did get finished, and of course, I was gone, and so were the auditor, and a new firm was brought in. So these are the kind of things that, you say, well, you lost the assignment. Well, I didn't really, because that was my assignment, was to get the audit done. And I finished that assignment. Overall, you go in, you do the best you can with the information that you have, and you have to feel good about yourself when you walk out the door. The interesting thing is, when I was brought into the company, I was told that they were hiring a controller and I would be very happy with the person. He was very smart, very competent. About 6 weeks after he was there, I found out he was the owner's son-in-law, that he had married the owner's daughter. The problem? He was very smart, he was very competent, but he was in on the lies. So it made things very, very difficult. You live, you learn, you move on to the next one. My last story for today involves 9/11. I was brought into a company. I was called on the golf course by an attorney that said, my client is being investigated by the SEC, and they have 2 weeks to file their annual statement. And if they don't finish within 2 weeks, the investigation will continue. If they meet the deadline, the investigation will be dropped. And they had decided they weren't going to make that deadline. So they needed a person who could be there Monday morning, who didn't need any instructions, was just told, this is what we need you to work on, and the person would know exactly what to do, how to do it, and get it done. Long story short is, we did meet the deadline. And in 2 weeks, the documents were filed, investigation was canceled, everybody was happy. The company decided to keep me on board as a consultant every quarter to review their SEC filings to make sure that everything was done correctly, everything was going to be accepted by the auditors, and also give helping hands to the CFO. Well, guess what happened? 9/11 happened. And this company was a first responder. So on that morning of 9/11, our trucks were rolling, everybody was mobilized and headed into the city for the disaster that occurred. Well, at that point, my job changed. I became the chief person in the company in charge of contracts, costing, because the type of organizations that you were going to be billing for 9/11 expenses were going to audit the bills extensively to make sure that they are not overpaying, being gouged, and so forth. I will tell you that we billed out between 17 and 21 million on the 9/11 contracts, and every single dollar, with the exception of $57,000, that was pretty much a gift back to the New York City Fire Department, was billed and collected, because no bill went out of the office to a customer without my signature on the bill and every piece of backup to the bill. If I didn't see it, it couldn't go. And yes, it was a very meticulous process. And yes, it wasn't exactly the fancy stuff that I like to do, but it was important because we were doing a very important job having to do with 9/11, having to do with environmental remediation. And it was important that the company, since it being a public company, was doing things correctly and doing it right and getting paid. So those are some of my stories that I wanted to share today. And on our next episode, we'll get back to more technical CFO stuff, where you could tune in and learn more about how to be a not-so-normal CFO, because the 4 stories I just told you, nothing about them was normal. And that's the way I like it. I like it not so normal and exciting. So if you like these stories and you like what you've seen in the previous episodes, subscribe to my channel, You're Not So Normal CFO, and we'll see you in a little bit with some more great details about being a CFO.